The wind howled like a wounded
Okay, I
animal
think
as
I'm
Olivia
finished with
Hayes
this
wiped
table
down the
now.
last table at Riverside Diner, her 23-year-old hands trembling slightly from exhaustion rather than cold. The old building creaked and groaned against the unprecedented December storm that had turned Interstate 87 into a frozen wasteland. Through the frost-covered windows, she could barely make out the highway, where abandoned cars dotted the landscape like scattered toys. The wall clock, a relic from the 1980s with faded numbers, showed 10:45 p.m. Olivia glanced at it, calculating the hours until her mother's next medical treatment. The bills kept mounting, relentless, as the snow piling against the diner's windows. Another round of chemotherapy was scheduled for Tuesday, and the insurance company had denied coverage again, citing some obscure clause in fine print. The letter sat folded in her pocket, a constant weight pressing against her heart. "Olivia, honey, you should head home before this gets worse," called Frank from behind the kitchen as his weathered face creased with concern. At 72, he'd seen plenty of upstate New York winters, but nothing quite like this. His silver hair caught the diner's fluorescent lights as he emerged, wiping his hands on a dish towel that had seen better days. The lines on his face had deepened in recent months, worry for his business etched alongside 7 decades of life experience. "Can't leave you here alone, Frank. Besides, my apartment's just as cold as this place." She managed a tired smile, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. The truth was, she couldn't afford to miss even one shift, not with the diner barely surviving, and her mother's treatment cost mounting faster than the snow outside. Last month, she'd had to choose between paying her heating bill and buying her mother's pain medication. The medication won, leaving her apartment a frigid reminder of her circumstances. Frank knew better than to argue. 3 years ago, Olivia had appeared on his doorstep looking for work, her eyes holding a depth of pain that belied her youth. He'd never asked about her past, and she'd never volunteered it, but he recognized a survivor when he saw one. Sometimes he caught her staring out the window with such profound sadness that it made his old heart ache. Whatever ghosts haunted Olivia Hayes, they were persistent ones. The diner itself told a story of faded Americana vinyl booths worn thin in spots, a jukebox in the corner that still played records rather than digital tracks, and wood paneling that hadn't been fashionable since the Carter administration. But it was clean, warm, and offered the best coffee for 50 miles, according to the truckers who frequented the place. A sanctuary of sorts, especially on nights like this, when the world outside turned hostile. The bell above the door chimed violently as it was pushed open against the wind, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a man in a cashmere overcoat that probably cost more than Frank's monthly rent. The stranger stumbled inside, followed by another equally well-dressed figure, then another. Soon the small diner was filling with men in expensive suits, all looking profoundly out of place amid the worn vinyl booths and chipped formica countertops. "Is this place even open?" The first man shook the snow from his dark hair, revealing sharp features and the kind of confidence that came with never hearing the word no. His steel gray eyes swept the humble diner with obvious distaste. At about 48, he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms much larger and more impressive than this modest establishment. His watch caught the light, a Rolex Daytona that alone could have paid off 6 months of Olivia's mother's medical bills. "Kitchen closes in 10 minutes, Olivia replied, grabbing a handful of menus. Something about his tone immediately put her on edge. "But given the storm, I suppose we can make an exception." Her voice remained steady, professional, though internally she was calculating how to accommodate this sudden influx of clearly wealthy patrons with their limited supplies. "We're not exactly here by choice, sweetheart." His voice carried the unmistakable edge of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Our cars are stuck. All of them." He gestured toward the window where, through the swirling snow, the silhouettes of several luxury vehicles could be faintly discerned stranded in the deepening drifts. More men in expensive suits continued filing through the door, each one shaking off snow and looking more out of place than the last. Olivia counted quickly, 15 total. 15 men who looked like they belonged in boardrooms, not a rundown diner that hadn't seen a renovation since the Reagan administration. The combined net worth in the room probably exceeded the GDP of a small nation. "I'm Robert Morgan," the first man announced, as if the name should mean something. When Olivia's expression remained blank, his eyebrows raised slightly. "Morgan Capital, Manhattan's largest private equity firm." His tone suggested this information should immediately change her demeanor, should transform her from simply a waitress to someone eager to please an important man. I'm Olivia Hayes, and this is Riverside Diner. Pleased to meet you. Her tone was polite but unimpressed. She'd learned long ago that money didn't automatically deserve reverence. 3 years had taught her that the wealthiest people were often the poorest in ways that mattered most. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't used to people who didn't recognize his name, and he certainly wasn't used to being handled with such casual professionalism by service staff. There was something about this young woman. Woman, he corrected himself mentally, noting the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite her worn uniform and tired eyes. Most people either fawned over him or feared him. Her neutral competence was disconcerting. "We need accommodations for the night," announced another man, this one with perfectly styled silver hair and a watch that cost more than most people's cars. "The highway patrol says nothing's moving until morning." His British accent added an air of authority to his demand, as if the very idea of spending the night in such surroundings was beneath contemplation. Frank emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "Well, gentlemen, this ain't exactly the Ritz-Carlton, but you're welcome to wait out the storm." His voice carried the easy confidence of a man who had seen enough of life to no longer be intimidated by titles or bank accounts. To him, these were just men who needed shelter, no different from the truckers and locals who made up his usual clientele. "Actually," Olivia said, studying the group with growing realization, "you might want to call ahead to the hotels in town." She knew the reality of their situation, but wanted to ensure they understood it as well. "Already tried," Robert interrupted, pulling out his phone to show the no signal icon. "No reception, nothing." The frustration in his voice was palpable, the irritation of a man unaccustomed to technology failing him. "Storm took out the cell tower about an hour ago," Frank confirmed. "Landlines are down too. Happens every few years up here." He shrugged, the gesture of a man long reconciled to the whims of nature. In these mountains, human constructs of power and wealth meant little when winter decided to flex its muscles. Olivia watched as the reality of the situation settled over the group. These were clearly men who were used to having solutions bought and delivered immediately. The concept of being genuinely stuck was foreign to them. She could see the progression on their faces, disbelief followed by indignation, finally settling into resignation. For perhaps the first time in their adult lives, their money couldn't change their circumstances. "So what exactly are you suggesting?" Robert's tone had shifted from annoyance to something approaching concern. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in, bringing with it an unfamiliar vulnerability. "I'm suggesting you settle in," Olivia replied, already moving toward the coffee pot. "Because unless you're planning to walk 15 miles through a blizzard in those Italian loafers, you're spending the night here." She gestured toward his feet, where his obviously expensive shoes were already showing water damage from the snow. One of the men, younger with nervous energy, laughed awkwardly. "She can't be serious. There has to be somewhere else." His voice pitched higher with anxiety, eyes darting around as if searching for an exit that might lead to a five-star hotel rather than a snow-covered parking lot. "Closest hotel is Valley Inn, 12 miles north," Frank said matter-of-factly. "But Route 9 is completely impassable. State Patrol's calling it the worst storm in 20 years. He moved behind the counter, reaching for coffee mugs with the practiced ease of someone who had performed the same action thousands of times. "Weather Service says it'll pass by morning, but until then, you gentlemen are stuck with us." Olivia began filling coffee cups with practiced efficiency, observing the group as she worked. They were all clearly successful, probably used to first-class everything, and now they were stuck in a small-town diner with mismatched furniture and a jukebox that only played country music from the 90s. The cosmic irony wasn't lost on her. A year ago, she might have found herself at the same type of executive retreat these men were likely returning from before everything fell apart. "This is ridiculous," muttered a man with a British accent. "I have a board meeting tomorrow morning." He checked his watch at Patek Philippe that cost more than the diner's annual revenue, as if time itself might bend to his schedule if he stared at it hard enough. "We all have obligations," Robert said sharply, but his eyes kept drifting to Olivia as she moved between tables. There was something about the way she handled the crisis. No panic, no drama, just quiet competence. It was refreshing, actually. When was the last time he'd encountered someone who simply dealt with problems instead of magnifying them with unnecessary emotion? Coffee's fresh, Olivia announced, setting down cups around the largest table. We've got some leftover chili sandwiches and Frank makes a mean apple pie. Not exactly gourmet, but it's warm. The steam rose from the mugs, carrying the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee throughout the diner, a small comfort against the howling storm outside. How much? Robert asked, reaching for his wallet. The movement was automatic, instinctual, the response of a man accustomed to purchasing solutions to all problems. Olivia paused, studying him. For coffee during a life-threatening storm? She shook her head slightly. It's called hospitality, Mr. Morgan. I wasn't planning to charge you for basic human decency. Something flickered in her eyes, not anger, but a quiet determination to maintain certain principles, even in difficult circumstances. A few of the men exchanged glances. They weren't used to generosity without strings attached, especially from people who clearly needed the money. In their world, every interaction was transactional, every kindness an investment expecting returns. That's very kind, Robert said carefully, but we can certainly pay for. You can pay by not treating this place like it's beneath you, Olivia replied evenly, meeting his gaze directly. We may not have marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but we've got better coffee than most places in Manhattan and enough heart to help strangers on the worst night of the year. Her words weren't delivered with anger or resentment, just a quiet certainty that reminded Robert of his most formidable business opponents, those rare individuals who knew their worth without needing validation. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind rattling the windows. Robert felt something unexpected, a flush of shame. When was the last time someone had called him out so elegantly? His world was filled with yes-men and sycophants, people eager to agree with whatever he said. This straightforward honesty was as startling as it was refreshing. You're right, he admitted, surprising both himself and his colleagues. That was presumptuous of me. Thank you for the hospitality, Olivia. The words felt strange on his tongue, not because he was thanking someone, but because he genuinely meant it. She nodded once, accepting the apology with grace. I'll get those sandwiches started. Frank, can you help me with the sleeping arrangements? Her response was practical, already moving past the moment to address the immediate needs at hand. Sleeping arrangements. The silver-haired man looked alarmed, as if the concept of sleeping anywhere but a king-size hotel bed was incomprehensible. His perfectly tailored suit seemed suddenly out of place, like formal wear at a camping trip. Well, you're not sleeping in your cars in sub-zero temperatures, Olivia said practically. We've got some cots in the storage room and the heat works better back here than probably anywhere else in town right now. She moved with purpose, already mentally reorganizing the diner's space to accommodate 15 unexpected overnight guests. As Olivia disappeared into the kitchen with Frank, the 15 men sat in stunned silence. They'd gone from luxury sedans to small-town diner, from five-star hotel expectations to camping out on cots. The cognitive dissonance was written across their faces, men whose identities were so thoroughly entwined with their wealth and status, suddenly confronted with circumstances where those advantages meant nothing. She's got spine, I'll give her that, murmured someone. Robert found himself nodding, still staring at the kitchen door where Olivia had vanished. In his world of carefully calculated risks and leveraged opportunities, her straightforward authenticity was as rare as it was compelling. In his 48 years, he'd met countless people who either feared him or wanted something from him. Olivia Hayes was the first person in recent memory who seemed to see him as just a person, a somewhat rude person who needed coffee and shelter, nothing more. The realization was both humbling and strangely liberating. The evening passed in an increasingly surreal atmosphere. Olivia and Frank worked tirelessly to make their unexpected guests comfortable, setting up makeshift sleeping areas, keeping the coffee flowing, and somehow managing to feed 15 hungry billionaires with whatever was left in the kitchen. What should have been a disaster gradually transformed into something almost pleasant. The old diner transformed as the night progressed. Tables were pushed to the sides to make room for the cots Frank had found in storage. The jukebox, once Olivia fixed the connection, played a mix of classic country and soft rock that created a surprisingly cozy atmosphere. The antique wall clock had stopped at 11:17 when the power briefly flickered, giving the entire scene a timeless quality, as if this strange gathering existed outside normal reality. Robert watched it all with growing fascination. Every interaction he had ever had with service staff had been transactional, polite, efficient, but ultimately about money exchanging hands. This was different. Olivia moved through the diner like she genuinely cared about their comfort, asking about dietary restrictions, making sure everyone had enough blankets, even tuning the old radio to find better music when the static became too annoying. She had an effortless way with people treating each man not according to his net worth or title, but as an individual with specific needs and preferences. When the tech CEO mentioned a gluten sensitivity, she appeared 10 minutes later with a specially prepared plate. When the older investment banker complained of back pain, she found an extra cushion to make his cot more comfortable. Small kindnesses offered without expectation of reward or recognition. You don't have to go to all this trouble, he told her as she refilled his cup for the fourth time around midnight. The coffee was surprisingly excellent, rich and complex without the burnt aftertaste that plagued most diners. It's not trouble, she replied simply. It's just what you do for people. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as a habit when she was focused on a task. Even people you don't know. People who could be criminals for all you know. He was only half joking, curious about her seemingly boundless goodwill towards strangers who had done little to deserve it. Olivia tilted her head, considering him. Are you criminals? There was a slight twinkle in her eye, suggesting she was playing along with his hypothetical. Well, some of us are investment bankers, so that's debatable. Robert found himself joking. The small smile that crossed Olivia's face was worth more than any business deal he had closed that year. It transformed her features, softening the weariness that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. I'll take my chances with investment bankers over freezing to death in a blizzard. She topped off his coffee with a practiced pour. You're not what I expected, he said quietly, studying her face in the soft glow of the diner's lights. There was an intelligence in her eyes that belied her surroundings, a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her worn uniform. And what did you expect? I don't know. Someone more impressed, intimidated. Most people, when they find out what I do, what I'm worth. He trailed off suddenly, uncomfortable with how entitled he sounded. Money doesn't change the fact that you're stuck in a snowstorm same as everyone else, Olivia interrupted gently. Tonight you're just Robert, and you needed help. Everything else is just noise. She said it without condescension, simply stating a truth that was self-evident to her if not to the world he typically inhabited. Robert stared at her for a long moment. When was the last time someone had used his first name without wanting something from him? When was the last time someone had treated him like just Robert? In boardrooms and business meetings at charity galas and exclusive clubs, he was always Mr. Morgan, or the Morgan Capital CEO. Even his ex-wife had started calling him Robert Morgan toward the end, as if his full name represented the corporate entity she'd married rather than the man. What about you, he asked. What's your story? Olivia Hayes. Something flickered across her face, too quick to interpret, but unmistakably guarded. Not much of a story to tell. Born here, work here, trying to keep this place running. The words were casual, practiced, but there was something beneath them, a careful evasion that piqued his curiosity further. College? The single word carried a weight that suggested a more complex truth. It was a calculated guess based on her vocabulary, her bearing, and the flashes of sophistication that occasionally broke through her carefully maintained facade. International business at Columbia, graduated summa cum laude. She said it matter-of-factly without pride or embellishment, not boasting, simply answering his question with the same straightforward honesty she'd shown all evening. Robert couldn't hide his surprise. Columbia, and you're working here. The cognitive dissonance was jarring. Columbia graduates with her obvious intelligence typically ended up at firms like his, not serving coffee in upstate diners. Life happens, Olivia said, her tone making it clear the subject was closed. Plans change. There was a finality to her words that discouraged further questioning, a boundary firmly drawn. Before Robert could respond, Frank's voice boomed from across the diner. Olivia, coffee pot's acting up again. The old machine had been temperamental all night, requiring frequent adjustments to keep producing the excellent coffee that had become their primary comfort. Duty calls, she said, already moving away. Robert watched her go, noting how she moved with unconscious grace despite her obvious exhaustion. There was a story there, He could feel it. In his business reading, People was survival, and Olivia Hayes had layers that intrigued him far more than they should. The night stretched on and slowly the atmosphere shifted. These titans of industry, stripped of their usual power and comfort, began talking to each other like actual human beings. Stories were shared, jokes were made, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, Olivia found herself actually laughing at something the British investor said about his first day in New York, a tale involving a misunderstood subway direction and accidentally ending up in Queens. "You know," said David Chen, a tech mogul from San Francisco, "this is the first genuine conversation I've had in months that wasn't about profit margins or stock prices." He cradled his coffee cup between his hands, the gesture oddly vulnerable for a man whose face had graced the cover of Forbes. "That's because you're not in your usual environment," Olivia observed, settling into a chair with her own cup of coffee. "No assistants to filters everything, no agendas to follow, just people being people." The storm outside had created a strange sort of intimacy, forcing connection where there would typically be none. "Very philosophical for 2 a.m., Robert commented, but his tone was admiring rather than mocking. There was a depth to her observations that continued to surprise him. "Frank says I think too much. Occupational hazard of the night shift." Olivia's eyes met his across the table. "Lots of time to observe people when you're invisible to them." The statement was loaded with meaning, a subtle commentary on the social dynamics she encountered daily. Invisible? Service staff usually are to people like you. Background noise, part of the scenery. She wasn't bitter about it, just matter of fact. "We see you, but you rarely see us." Robert felt another uncomfortable stab of recognition. How many waitresses, cleaning, ladies receptionists had he walked past without seeing? How many Olivias had served him coffee without him ever noticing they were actual people with thoughts and dreams? The realization was discomforting, forcing him to confront aspects of his behavior he'd never considered problematic. "That's probably true," he admitted, "and probably wrong of us." The acknowledgement felt important somehow, a small step toward a perspective he'd never bothered to consider before. Olivia studied him with those dark, intelligent eyes. "Probably." The hint of a smile softened the assessment, suggesting she appreciated his honesty, if not his prior obliviousness. As the night progressed, Robert found himself drawn to a shelf behind the counter, where several books were stacked. During a lull in the conversation, he wandered over and examined them. Most were paperback novels, worn from multiple readings, but one caught his eye, a heavyweight textbook on international business theory. He pulled it out, surprised by its academic nature. "Light reading?" he asked, holding it up, when Olivia returned from the kitchen. She froze momentarily, then shrugged. "I like to keep up with the field." A casual dismissal, but her momentary hesitation suggested the book meant more to her than she was letting on. Robert opened the book and noticed handwritten notes in the margins, intelligent, incisive observations that showed a deep understanding of complex economic principles. "These your notes." He was impressed by the analytical thinking evident in the annotations, the connections drawn between theoretical frameworks and real-world applications. "Old habits die hard." She took the book from him and returned it to the shelf, but not before he noticed a name written in elegant script on the inside cover: Olivia E. Lawrence. The name tickled something in his memory, a connection he couldn't quite make in the moment. The old clock on the wall had stopped at some point, its hands frozen at 11:17. The diner existed in a strange, timeless bubble, cut off from the world by walls of snow and wind. In this suspended reality, barriers between people seemed to dissolve. A French investor was discussing wine with Frank, who turned out to have spent his youth traveling through Europe before settling in upstate New York. The British banker was teaching one of the younger men how to play chess with a travel set he'd found in his briefcase. And Robert Morgan was discovering that Olivia Hayes' small-town waitress could discuss macroeconomic theory with more insight than most of his Harvard-educated analysts. "How do you know all this?" he asked, after she had effortlessly dissected the flaws in a recent trade agreement that had been giving his international division headaches for months. Her analysis was not just informed, but innovative, identifying leverage points that his team had overlooked. "I read, I listen, I pay attention." Olivia sipped her coffee. "The world doesn't stop being interesting just because your circumstances change." There was something in her tone, a resilience born of adversity perhaps, that resonated with him in unexpected ways. But why are you here with your education, your knowledge? You could be working for someone like you. There was no heat in her voice, just quiet certainty. Some things matter more than corner offices and expense accounts, Mr. Morgan. Robert, he corrected. After discussing geopolitical market influences at 3 in the morning during a blizzard, I think we're past formalities. The small victory of making her smile again warmed him more than the coffee. It reached her eyes this time, transforming her face and giving him a glimpse of who she might have been before whatever circumstances brought her to this diner. As dawn approached and the storm finally began to subside, Olivia made breakfast for all 15 men. Scrambled eggs, bacon toast, and the best coffee Robert had ever tasted. The conversation had evolved throughout the night from polite small talk to genuine connection, and now there was an easy camaraderie that felt almost surreal given their circumstances. Sunlight began to filter through the frosted windows, casting a golden glow across the diner. Outside, the world was transformed. Snow draped every surface like a pristine blanket, and the sky had cleared to a brilliant blue. The beauty of it was breathtaking, a stark contrast to the threatening darkness of the night before. This has been... Robert struggled to find the words as he prepared to leave. How could he articulate the strange significance of these hours spent in a rundown diner with a woman who challenged his worldview simply by being herself? Expensive, Olivia suggested, with a small smirk, gesturing to the makeshift accommodations and empty coffee pots. Life-changing, he finished seriously, and he meant it. Something had shifted inside him during this strange night, a perspective altered in ways he couldn't fully articulate yet. Olivia's smile faltered slightly. She'd seen that look before, wealthy men who confused gratitude with attraction, who mistook her kindness for availability. The protective walls that had momentarily lowered during the night began to rise again. Well, I hope your drive back to the city is safe, Mr. Morgan. The formal address was deliberate, creating distance. Robert felt it immediately and found himself oddly disappointed. After hours of genuine connection, they were back to social roles and expectations. Robert, he corrected. After last night, I think we're past the formalities. Have a good life, Robert, Olivia said gently but firmly, already starting to clear the tables. The dismissal was kind but unmistakable, a closing door on whatever connection had briefly formed between them. Robert wanted to say something more, but the other men were already heading for their cars. The storm had passed, the highways were being cleared, and reality was reasserting itself. He was a billionaire CEO, and she was a small-town waitress. What had happened here was beautiful but temporary, like the snow that would melt by afternoon. Except as he walked to his car, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something important behind. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he'd been seen not for his wealth or position, but for himself. The experience left him both unsettled and longing for more. 3 weeks later, Olivia was still trying to process what had happened to her life. The morning after the storm, when 135 luxury cars had descended on Riverside Diner, she'd thought she was hallucinating from exhaustion. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Maseratis, and more Mercedes-Benzes than she'd ever seen in one place lined both sides of the normally quiet road. Apparently, each of the 15 stranded executives had called every wealthy friend and associate they knew, and all of them wanted to experience the diner that had sheltered New York's elite during the storm of the decade. Reporters, photographers, and curiosity seekers had followed, turning her quiet workplace into chaos. News vans parked outside, hoping to interview the angel waitress, who'd opened her doors to stranded moguls. Social media exploded with posts about the small-town diner and its mysterious proprietress. Overnight, Riverside Diner had become a sensation. Billionaires Blizzard was trending on every social media platform. Food critics from New York magazines made the journey upstate to review their coffee and apple pie. Reservations were being requested months in advance. The increased business should have been a blessing, but Olivia felt overwhelmed by the attention. Each camera flash, each intrusive question felt like a threat to the careful anonymity she'd constructed over the past 3 years. "Order up," Frank called, sliding plates across the pass. His arthritis had been bothering him more lately, and Olivia worried about him keeping up with the sudden influx of customers. The lines of pain around his eyes had deepened, though he insisted he was enjoying the diner's newfound success. Coming, Olivia grabbed the plates and navigated through the crowded diner. A month ago, their biggest rush was the Sunday after church crowd. Now they had lines out the door and reservation requests for a place that had never taken reservations. The bell chimed and Olivia glanced up from taking an order, her breath catching as she recognized the man in the expensive overcoat. Robert Morgan stood in the doorway looking as confident and put together as he had 3 weeks ago, but something in his expression was different, less arrogant, more uncertain. He stood there for a moment scanning the packed diner until his eyes found hers. Recognition flashed between them, followed by something more complex. For a brief moment, they were back in that strange, suspended night when barriers had fallen and genuine connection had seemed possible. "Mr. Morgan," she said politely, finishing with her current table before approaching him. "Back for more of that life-changing coffee." Her tone was light professional, but her heart was beating faster than it should have been. "Something like that." His smile was tentative. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk." He seemed different somehow, less the imperious CEO, and more the man she'd glimpsed during the storm, when pretenses had fallen away in the face of shared circumstances. "I'm working," Olivia replied, not unkindly, but clearly setting boundaries. "But if you'd like a table, I can seat you." She gestured to the crowded diner where every surface was occupied by chattering customers, many of whom were already sneaking photos of Robert on their phones. Robert glanced around the crowded diner, noting how every conversation had stopped the moment he walked in. People were staring, some not so subtly taking pictures with their phones. The viral nature of the story had made him almost as recognizable here as Olivia herself. Perhaps somewhere more private. The request was reasonable given the circumstances, but something in his tone triggered Olivia's defenses. Olivia's expression cooled slightly. "This is a diner, not a private club. If you want privacy, there's probably somewhere more your speed in Manhattan." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, a reflexive protection against the vulnerability she'd felt during their night together. "That came out wrong," Robert said quickly. "I meant the attention. It must be difficult for you, all this sudden fame." His gaze was concerned rather than condescending, a distinction Olivia wasn't prepared for. Olivia studied his face, searching for signs of the condescension she'd grown used to from customers who'd seen her story on the news. Instead, she found what looked like genuine concern. The realization softened her stance slightly, though caution remained. "It's been challenging," she admitted, "but good for business." She gestured to the packed diner, the line still extending out the door, despite the cold. "Is it?" Robert gestured toward a corner table that had just cleared. "5 minutes, please." It wasn't quite a request, but neither was it a demand, something in between an appeal from one person to another. Against her better judgment, Olivia nodded. She led him to the table and sat across from him, very aware that every eye in the diner was tracking their conversation. Fame, however unexpected and unwanted, had robbed her of the anonymity she'd carefully cultivated since leaving her old life behind. "You didn't give any interviews," Robert observed. It wasn't a question, but the curiosity was evident in his tone. Wasn't any of their business what happened that night? Olivia's posture remained guarded, her hands clasped tightly on the table. The last thing she needed was more publicity, more chances for someone to recognize her, to connect the dots between Olivia Hayes and the person she used to be. Most people in your situation would have capitalized on the attention. Book deals, talk show appearances, sponsorship opportunities. His tone was conversational, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. Olivia's laugh was soft but humorless. "And what situation is that exactly, Mr. Morgan?" "Please call me Robert." He leaned forward slightly. "And I meant well, clearly money is tight. The diner, your mother's medical expenses?" Olivia's spine went rigid. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" The temperature between them seemed to draw several degrees, her expression shuddering closed like a door slammed in high wind. Robert realized his mistake immediately. In his world, background checks and financial assessments were standard procedure before any meaningful interaction. He'd forgotten that normal people considered such things invasive. The flash of hurt and anger in her eyes made him realize just how badly he'd miscalculated. "I didn't mean you had me investigated." It wasn't a question. The betrayal in her voice was palpable, as if he'd violated something sacred between them. "It's standard practice when what?" Olivia's voice was quiet but deadly. "When you're slumming with the help, when you decide to play philanthropist with the poor little waitress." Each word was precision aimed, finding vulnerabilities he didn't know he had. "That's not," Robert ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He was usually articulate, but something about Olivia made his thoughts scatter. I was concerned about you, the attention, the reporters. I wanted to make sure you were okay. So you invaded my privacy instead of just asking me. The hurt beneath her anger was evident now, a deeper wound than mere indignation. I know how this looks, but it looks like you think I'm a charity case who can't take care of herself, Olivia said, standing. It looks like you think I'm so far beneath you that you need a full financial report before deciding whether I'm worth your concern. Olivia, please. He reached for her hand but stopped short of actually touching her. Thank you for your visit, Mr. Morgan. Enjoy the coffee. She walked away, leaving Robert sitting alone at the corner table with the distinct feeling that he'd just blown something important. From behind the kitchen pass, Frank watched the interaction with knowing eyes. He'd seen plenty of rich folks come through over the years, usually lost or slumming, but he'd also seen the way Robert had looked at Olivia that night during the storm, like a man seeing sunlight for the first time. Strike out, Frank asked when Robert approached the counter to pay. Completely, Robert admitted. I wanted to help her, and instead, I insulted her. The defeat in his voice was genuine, lacking the entitled frustration Frank might have expected. Help her with what, exactly? Robert gestured vaguely. The medical bills, the diner's finances. It wouldn't be difficult to. Son, let me stop you right there, Frank interrupted. Olivia's got more pride than most folks got money. You want to help her, treat her like an equal, not a problem to be solved. His weathered hand placed the check on the counter with surprising gentleness. I don't understand. And he genuinely didn't. In Robert's world, problems were identified and eliminated through the application of resources. It was efficient, practical, and generally appreciated. Olivia's reaction seemed incomprehensible in that context. Frank studied Robert with sharp eyes that had seen decades of human nature. You're used to buying your way out of problems. Can't buy your way into trust. He tapped his chest over his heart. That's earned, not purchased. Then how do I fix this? The question was sincere, the vulnerability in it surprising them both. You don't fix it, you earn it. Frank poured himself a cup of coffee. That girl's been hurt before by men who thought money made them better than her. Prove you're different. That's for you to figure out. But I'll tell you this, Olivia's got a degree from Columbia in international business and speaks 4 languages. She's working here because sometimes life kicks you when you're down, not because she can't do better. Robert felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Columbia, 4 languages, international business. The woman he'd been unconsciously condescending to was probably more educated than half his board of directors. And suddenly, the name he'd seen in her book, Olivia E. Lawrence, began to stir connections in his memory business, dealings from several years ago that he couldn't quite bring into focus. Why didn't she say anything? Would you, when every stranger assumes you're stupid because you're serving them coffee, when showing you're overqualified for your job just makes people uncomfortable? Frank's question cut to the heart of privilege in a way Robert had never considered. Robert left the diner with his head spinning. Olivia Hayes was a puzzle he couldn't solve with money or power, and for the first time in years, he found himself genuinely intrigued by another person. Not just attracted, though, she was beautiful but fascinated by her mind, her principles, the mystery that surrounded her. Meanwhile, Olivia was in the kitchen, aggressively cleaning an already spotless grill. The metal surface gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she scrubbed with unnecessary force, as if she could erase her frustration through physical effort. You okay, honey? Frank asked gently, recognizing the signs of her distress. Fine, Olivia replied curtly, then sighed. I hate that he had me investigated, Frank. Hate that he thinks I need rescuing. The vulnerability in her voice belied the strength she projected to the world. After everything she'd survived, being treated like a charity case cut deeper than she cared to admit. Maybe he thinks he needs rescuing. Olivia looked up, surprised. What do you mean? 30 years I've been watching people, Olivia. That man's got everything money can buy and nothing money can. Frank's insight, born of decades observing humanity from behind a diner counter, often struck to the heart of matters others missed entirely. You think he drove 2 hours in the snow just to check on business for the diner? Maybe, or maybe for the first time in his life, someone treated him like a human being instead of a bank account, and he can't stop thinking about it. Frank's smile was knowing the wisdom of years evident in his weathered face. Olivia considered this, remembering the way Robert had looked during the storm, not arrogant or demanding, but almost lonely, like someone who'd forgotten what genuine connection felt like. She recalled the vulnerability in his admission that most people were either intimidated by or impressed with his wealth, never seeing the person behind the bank account. Doesn't matter, she said finally. People like him don't end up with people like me. That's not how the world works. The resignation in her voice spoke of past disappointments, of lessons learned the hard way. Honey, Frank said with a gentle smile, sometimes the world surprises you. Olivia wanted to believe that, but life had taught her to be practical about fairy tales. Rich men didn't fall for waitresses, no matter how many romantic comedies suggested otherwise. They had their adventures, then returned to their appropriate partners in their appropriate worlds. The stratification of society was too entrenched, the differences in power and experience too vast to bridge. Still, she couldn't deny that something about Robert Morgan had gotten under her skin. The way he'd looked genuinely ashamed when she called out his assumptions, the way he'd admitted fault instead of defending his actions. In her experience, powerful men rarely apologized for anything. They justified, they rationalized, but they rarely acknowledged error, especially to someone they perceived as beneath them socially. But she'd learned the hard way that thinking too much about what-ifs was a dangerous game. She had responsibilities, bills to pay, and a life to rebuild. Romance was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially with someone whose world was so completely different from hers, and especially with someone who might be connected, however indirectly, to the pain and loss that had driven her from her former life. What Olivia didn't know was that 200 miles south, Robert Morgan was having the same thoughts in reverse. He'd built an empire by reading people, understanding their motivations, predicting their behavior. But everything he thought he knew about human nature had been challenged by one night in a snowstorm and a waitress who served coffee with a side of uncomfortable truth. As his driver navigated the crowded Manhattan streets toward Morgan Capital's headquarters, Robert stared out at the city without really seeing it. The gleaming towers of glass and steel, the symbols of achievement and power that had defined his existence for decades, suddenly seemed hollow, devoid of the warmth and authenticity he'd experienced in that small upstate diner. For the first time in 15 years, Robert Morgan couldn't stop thinking about someone who wasn't a business connection. And for the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked like he'd never been north of the Bronx. Olivia signed for it with curiosity, noting the expensive cream-colored envelope and the return address that simply read, Morgan Capital, Manhattan. Inside was a check for $50,000 made out to Riverside Diner, along with a handwritten note on letterhead that probably cost more than she made in a week. Olivia, this isn't charity. It's payment for services rendered during the storm, plus compensation for the inconvenience our unexpected arrival caused your business. Please accept it in the spirit it's intended. Robert P.S. I've been thinking about what you said regarding treating people as equals. You were right. I'm still learning. Olivia stared at the check for a full minute before walking to the kitchen where Frank was prepping for the morning rush. Frank, we have a problem. She showed him the check and the note. Frank whistled low under his breath. Well, that's a generous gesture. It's manipulation, Olivia said firmly. He thinks he can buy his way back into my good graces. She paced the small kitchen, the check crumpling slightly in her tightening grip. Maybe Frank studied the note. Says here it's not charity. $50,000 for one night of coffee and sandwiches. Come on, Frank, that's exactly what charity looks like when rich people want to feel good about themselves. Frank placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. What are you going to do? Olivia looked at the check again. The amount would cover the diner's outstanding debts. Frank's hip replacement he had been putting off and still leave enough to upgrade some of the ancient kitchen equipment. It would also make a significant dent in her mother's mounting medical bills. The practical part of her mind calculated exactly how far this money would stretch, how many problems it would solve. I don't know, she admitted. Taking it feels wrong, but we need it. Before she could decide, the phone rang. The old wall-mounted unit rarely rang these days. Most customers called cell phones, making the sound almost startling in the quiet morning kitchen. Riverside Diner, this is Olivia. Please don't hang up. Robert's voice was immediate, urgent. I know you got the check. he continued when she didn't immediately disconnect. And I know you think I throw money at problems to make them go away. Well, you do think money solves everything, Olivia replied coolly. But you can't buy forgiveness, Mr. Morgan. That's not what this is about. There was something different in his voice, a vulnerability she hadn't heard before even during the storm. Then what is it about silence stretched between them? Olivia could hear traffic in the background. He was probably calling from his car between meetings, treating this like another business transaction to be managed. I can't stop thinking about that night, Robert said, finally his voice quieter. Not because of the storm or the inconvenience, but because of you. The way you treated us treated me like I was worth helping without expecting anything in return. So few people in my life do that. So you had me investigated. The hurt was still fresh. So I panicked. The admission surprised them both. Olivia, in my world, everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. When someone is genuinely kind, without expecting payment, I don't know how to process it. The investigation wasn't about you being beneath me. It was about me not understanding how someone could be that good. Olivia found herself gripping the phone tighter. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Vulnerability, maybe. Real uncertainty. The check isn't about charity, Robert continued. It's about respect. You provided a service that night that went far beyond food and shelter. You reminded 15 jaded businessmen what human decency looks like. That's worth more than $50,000, but it's what I can offer. You could have just said thank you. I tried. You walked away because I treated you like a curiosity instead of a person. You're right again. Robert's laugh was rueful. I have a habit of making the wrong choices with you. Despite herself, Olivia felt her anger softening. Why does it matter what I think of you? I don't know, Robert answered honestly. That's what's driving me crazy. Olivia closed her eyes, feeling something dangerous stirring in her chest. Hope, the one emotion she'd promised herself she couldn't afford. Mr. Morgan, Robert, please. I can't cash this check. Why not? Because accepting money from you changes things between us. Makes this about debt and obligation instead of... She trailed off, realizing she was about to admit more than she intended. Instead of whatever this conversation actually is. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then don't cash it, but don't send it back either. Keep it as insurance for your mother's medical expenses, for the diner, for whatever you need. No strings attached. There are always strings attached. Not this time. The certainty in his voice was almost convincing. Olivia wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her that men like Robert Morgan didn't give away $50,000 without expectations. What do you want from me? Honestly, I want to take you to dinner, somewhere nice where we can have a real conversation without reporters or customers or complications. I work nights. Lunch then, or coffee, or hell, a walk in Central Park. I just want to see you again without feeling like I'm disappointing you. The honesty in his voice nearly undid her resolve. Why? Because in 48 years, you're the first person who made me want to be better than I am. Olivia's heart did something dangerous in her chest. This was exactly the kind of thinking that had gotten her in trouble before, believing that she could somehow save or change a man, believing that she was special enough to be worth the effort. Robert, she said carefully, you don't know anything about me. Real me, not the saint the newspapers made up. Then tell me the truth. It's not that simple. Why not? Because the truth was that Olivia Hayes had once been Olivia Elizabeth Lawrence, heir to a hotel fortune that had been systematically destroyed by corporate raiders. Because she'd fled Manhattan 3 years ago after discovering her fiancé's betrayal and her family's business partner's theft. Because she was working at Riverside Diner, not just to survive, but to hide from the world that had chewed her up and spit her out. Because if Robert knew who she really was, he'd realize that the woman he was pursuing was the same woman whose family's empire he'd helped dismantle when he'd backed William Ashford's hostile takeover of Lawrence Hotels 3 years ago. Olivia, are you there? I'm here. She managed to keep her voice steady. Robert, this is complicated in ways you can't imagine. Then help me understand. I can't, not yet, maybe not ever. What if I'm willing to wait? The question hung between them like a bridge. Olivia wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Part of her wanted to tell him everything, the truth about her identity. about how their lives had been connected long before that stormy night. But another part, the part that had learned to protect itself, knew that some bridges burned you when you tried to cross them. "I need time," she said finally. "Time I can give you. Pressure I can't seem to stop myself from applying." Robert's laugh was self-deprecating. "Fair warning, I'm not very good at wanting things I can't have, and I'm not very good at being patient. But for you, I'll try." After she hung up, Olivia stared at the check for a long time. $50,000, enough to catch up on her mother's treatments, enough to help Frank update the equipment, enough to breathe a little easier. But accepting it felt like accepting something else, something she wasn't ready for. Frank found her 20 minutes later, still staring at the check. "What you gonna do?" "I don't know," Olivia admitted. "Taking the money feels wrong, but we need it. Not taking it feels like pride getting in the way of practicality." "What does your gut tell you?" Olivia's gut told her that Robert Morgan was dangerous to her carefully reconstructed peace of mind. Her gut told her that no matter how sincere he seemed, getting involved with him would eventually lead to heartbreak. Her gut also told her that she was already more involved than she wanted to admit. "My gut tells me I'm in trouble either way." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "You know, in 50 years of marriage, my Sarah used to say, the biggest mistake people make is assuming they can predict how love stories end." "This isn't a love story, Frank." "Isn't it?" Frank's eyes twinkled. "Man drives 2 hours through questionable weather just to apologize for a conversation that went badly. Sends money he knows you won't take just to prove he's listening to what you said. That sounds like the beginning of something to me. Or the beginning of a disaster." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Frank said with a shrug. "Question is, you going to let fear make your choices, or you going to see what happens when you give someone a chance to surprise you?" Olivia looked out the window at the December sky, clear and blue after weeks of gray. The storm had passed, but somehow she felt like she was still standing in the middle of one. "What if he hurts me?" she whispered. "What if he doesn't?" Frank countered gently. That evening, Olivia made a decision. She called the number on Robert's business card, reaching his personal assistant. "This is Olivia Hayes. Please tell Mr. Morgan that I'll keep the check in trust for the diner, but I won't cash it unless we genuinely need it." She took a deep breath. "And tell him if he wants to have lunch at sometime he can call me. But no investigators, no background checks, no research, just two people having a conversation." 2 days later, Robert called. "Lunch," he said without preamble when Olivia answered. "Hello to you too." "Sorry. Hello, Olivia. How are you? Would you like to have lunch with me?" Olivia smiled despite herself. "Better. Yes, I would, but I picked the place." "Deal. We're Rossetti's. It's a little Italian place about 20 minutes from here. Nothing fancy, but the lasagna's incredible." "Sounds perfect." "One condition," Olivia added. "No suit, and you're paying your own bill." Robert's laugh was warm and genuine. "Yes, ma'am." As Olivia hung up, she felt the first flutter of something that might have been hope. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe sometimes the best love stories were the ones you never saw coming. But as she marked her calendar for their lunch date, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into something that would change everything. And she still hadn't decided whether that was something to anticipate or fear. Rossetti's Italian kitchen was exactly what Olivia had promised, nothing fancy, but the kind of place where the owner's grandmother's recipes still guided every dish. Robert arrived 10 minutes early, having driven himself in a simple Audi sedan instead of his usual chauffeur-driven Mercedes. He'd also followed Olivia's instructions about the suit, opting instead for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably still cost more than most people's monthly salary, but at least looked less intimidating. Taking a seat at a corner booth, he found himself oddly nervous, something he hadn't felt on a date since college. Olivia walked in precisely on time, and Robert felt his breath catch. Without her work uniform, she looked different, more polished, more confident. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her curves modestly, and her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders. But it was her smile, genuine and slightly nervous, that made his heart skip. "You clean up nice," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "You look beautiful," Robert replied, then immediately worried he'd been too forward. But Olivia's smile widened. "Thank you. I have to admit, it's nice to be somewhere that smells like garlic instead of French fry oil." Their conversation started tentatively, but quickly found its rhythm. Robert had worried they'd have nothing to talk about outside the crisis that had brought them together, but Olivia was fascinating. She spoke intelligently about everything from current events to literature, and her observations about people and human nature were sharp and insightful. You really did study at Columbia, Robert said, not making it a question. International business summa cum laude, Olivia confirmed, twirling pasta around her fork. Minor in art history. And you ended up at Riverside because Olivia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the point where she'd have to decide how much truth to share. Life happens, she said carefully. Sometimes plans change. Robert sensed there was more to the story, but he'd learned his lesson about pushing too hard. Fair enough. We all have things we'd rather not discuss. What about you? Olivia asked, deflecting. Always wanted to be a corporate raider. Private equity, Robert corrected with a slight smile. Though I suppose the distinction is semantic. He took a sip of his water. And no, actually, I wanted to be a teacher when I was a kid. High school history. Olivia's surprise was genuine. What changed? My father died when I was 17. Heart attack. Robert's voice grew distant. Left my mother with a lot of debt and very few options. I'm sorry, Olivia said softly. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was educational, Robert replied, then seemed to catch himself. Sorry that sounded cold. It's just, I learned early that the world doesn't care about your dreams if you can't afford to chase them. Olivia felt a sharp pang of recognition. How many times had she thought similar thoughts over the past 3 years? But you must enjoy what you do now. The power, the success. Robert considered this. I'm good at it. I'm good at reading companies, seeing their weaknesses, maximizing their potential. But enjoy, he paused. Until recently, I'd forgotten there was supposed to be a difference between being good at something and enjoying it. What changed recently? Robert met her eyes directly. I met someone who reminded me that there's more to life than profit margins. The intensity of his gaze made Olivia's cheeks warm. She looked down at her plate, suddenly very interested in her lasagna. Robert, she said carefully, what are you looking for here with me? I mean, honestly. I don't know, his laugh was self-deprecating. For that probably sounds pathetic from a man who makes decisions worth millions every day, but you've made me question everything I thought I knew about what I wanted. Olivia felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. This vulnerable, uncertain version of Robert was far more dangerous to her peace of mind than the arrogant businessman had been. That's not fair, she whispered. What's not fair? Being charming, being real, making me want to... She stopped herself. Want to what? Trust you, Olivia finished quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the admission hanging between them. Robert reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You can trust me, Olivia. Olivia looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. For a moment, she almost believed him. Almost believed that maybe somehow they could find a way to make this work despite everything that stood between them. Then her phone rang. Olivia glanced at the screen and her face went pale. I have to take this, she said, pulling her hand away. It's the hospital. Robert watched as Olivia stepped outside to take the call, noting how her posture changed, becoming tense and worried. Through the window, he could see her pacing, one hand pressed to her forehead in obvious distress. When she returned to the table 5 minutes later, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry, she said, grabbing her purse. I have to go. My mother, there's been a complication with her treatment. What hospital? Robert asked, already standing. I'll drive you. No, that's not, you don't need to. Olivia, Robert's voice was gentle but firm. Let me help. The drive to Albany Medical Center passed in tense silence. Olivia sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out the window, while Robert navigated traffic with the efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis management. She's going to be okay, he said quietly as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. You don't know that, Olivia replied, but her voice lacked conviction. She was scared and trying not to show it. No, I don't, Robert admitted, but I know that whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone. Olivia looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his expression that made her chest tight. Concern, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked like genuine care. At the hospital, Olivia was quickly whisked away by medical staff, leaving Robert alone in the waiting room with his thoughts. He'd meant what he said about her not facing this alone, but as he sat among the sterile chairs and medical equipment, he realized he had no right to make such promises. He was essentially a stranger who had had lunch with her once. What was he doing here? An hour later, Olivia emerged from the ICU looking exhausted but relieved. "She's stable," she said, sinking into the chair beside him. "They think it was just a reaction to the new medication. They're going to monitor her overnight, but the doctor says she should be fine." "Thank God," Robert said and meant it. Olivia turned to study his face. "You waited." "Of course I waited. You barely know me." "I know enough," Robert replied simply. Olivia felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she'd carefully maintained beginning to crumble. This man, who could have been anywhere doing anything, had spent 2 hours in a hospital waiting room for someone he barely knew simply because she'd needed him to. "Robert," she began, then stopped as she noticed someone approaching them. The man was tall, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of privilege. He looked familiar, though Olivia couldn't immediately place him. "Robert Morgan," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Fancy meeting you here." Robert's entire body went rigid. "William." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face as recognition hit her like a physical blow. William Ashford, her former fiancé, the man who'd betrayed her family and destroyed everything she'd ever loved. "Olivia Elizabeth Lawrence," William said, his voice carrying a note of cruel satisfaction. "Or are you going by Hayes these days? How quaint." Robert looked between them, confusion and something that might have been dread crossing his features. "You two know each other." "Oh, we know each other very well," William replied smoothly. "Olivia and I were engaged 3 years ago before her family lost everything. Of course, that was before she disappeared like a coward instead of facing the consequences of her father's poor business decisions." "That's not what happened," Olivia said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Isn't it?" William's smile was vicious. "Tell me, Olivia, have you informed Mr. Morgan about your little secret about who you really are?" Robert was looking at Olivia now, and she could see the questions forming in his eyes, the pieces clicking together in a way that would destroy everything. "Olivia Elizabeth Lawrence," Robert said slowly, understanding dawning. "Lawrence Hotels." "The very same," William confirmed. "Though I doubt she's mentioned that particular family connection, or the fact that you, my dear Robert, were instrumental in helping me acquire her father's company 3 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia watched as Robert's face went through a series of emotions, shock, recognition, and finally something that looked like betrayal. "You knew," he said to Olivia, his voice barely above a whisper. "You knew who I was, what I'd done, and you never said anything." "Robert, I can explain." "Can you?" William interrupted, clearly enjoying the drama. "Can you explain how you've been lying to him from the moment you met playing the innocent waitress when you're actually the privileged princess who couldn't handle losing her silver spoon?" "That's enough," Robert said sharply, his protective instincts overriding his shock. But the damage was done. Olivia could see it in Robert's eyes. The trust they'd been building was shattered. He was looking at her like he didn't know her at all. "I need some air," Olivia said quietly, and walked away before either man could respond. Robert started to follow her, but William caught his arm. "Let her go," William said. "Trust me, you're better off without the complications she brings. Olivia's always been good at playing the victim, but the truth is she's exactly like every other spoiled rich girl who's never had to work for anything. This little waitress act, it's just another performance." Robert shook off William's hand, his jaw tight with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I was engaged to her, Robert. I know exactly what kind of person Olivia Lawrence is underneath all that false modesty. She's manipulative, self-centered, and completely incapable of handling real adversity. The moment things got difficult, she ran away and left her family to deal with the mess. And you had nothing to do with creating that mess." William's smile faltered slightly. "Business is business. If Richard Lawrence couldn't handle the competition." "Competition, is that what we're calling fraud now?" Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. "I have no idea what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Facts that I should have looked into more carefully 3 years ago." Robert stepped closer to William, his voice dropping to a level that made other people in the waiting room glance over nervously. Stay away from Olivia. Stay away from her mother. And if I find out you've done anything to hurt either of them, you'll discover exactly how unpleasant I can make your life. Robert left William standing in the hospital corridor and went to find Olivia. He found her in the parking lot sitting on a bench outside the main entrance, staring at the ground. Olivia. She looked up and he could see she'd been crying. I suppose you have questions. Just one, Robert said, sitting beside him. Why didn't you tell me? Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Because I was afraid of exactly this. That you'd look at me differently. That you'd think I'd been using you or lying to you or playing some kind of game. Were you Bana? No. The word was immediate and fierce. Robert, that night at the diner when you walked in, I had no idea who you were. Yes, I recognized your name when you introduced yourself, but I didn't connect it to what happened to my family until later. And by then I was already... Already what? Already falling for you, Olivia whispered. Robert felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Olivia looked at me. She raised her eyes to his, and he could see all the fear and vulnerability she'd been hiding. I don't care who you used to be, he said quietly. I don't care about your family's money or your connections or any of that. The woman I've gotten to know, the woman who opened her diner to strangers in a storm, who works 12-hour shifts to take care of people she loves, who treats everyone with dignity regardless of their station, that's who you are. Everything else is just history. But you helped him, Olivia said, her voice breaking slightly. You helped William destroy my family's company. I backed a business deal without doing my due diligence, Robert replied grimly. If William committed fraud, and I'm beginning to suspect he did, then I was as much a victim as anyone else. But Olivia, I need you to know something. He reached out to touch her face gently. If I had known then what I know now, if I had known that backing that deal would hurt you, I would never have done it. Olivia leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I'm so tired of running, she whispered. Then stop running, Robert said simply. Stay and fight with me. Olivia opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd driven her to the hospital, who'd waited for hours in uncomfortable chairs, who'd just promised to stand with her against the world. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe sometimes the world did surprise you. Okay, she said quietly, but there's something else you need to know. About my mother, about why I'm really here. Tell me. She doesn't know who I really am. Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. After everything fell apart, after I discovered what William had done, I couldn't face telling her that I'd been so stupid, so blind. So I became Olivia Hayes, and I've been sending money for her medical care without her knowing it comes from me. Robert processed this information, understanding dawning. The medical expenses Frank mentioned, you've been paying them with what was left of your trust fund. Yes, but it's running out, and her condition is getting worse, and I don't know what I'm going to do. Olivia's voice cracked. I can't lose her, Robert. She's all I have left. Robert pulled Olivia into his arms, holding her tightly, as she finally let herself cry for everything she'd lost, everything she'd been carrying alone for 3 years. You're not alone anymore, he murmured against her hair. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together. As he held her, Robert's mind was already working, formulating plans. William Ashford had destroyed Olivia's life once, but he wouldn't get the chance to do it again. It was time for some long overdue justice. But first, Robert had a phone call to make. His lawyers were about to get very busy. 3 days later, Robert's Manhattan office felt like a war room. Legal documents covered his massive oak desk, and his top attorneys worked with the intensity of generals planning a campaign. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a spectacular view of the city skyline, the world Robert had conquered, now serving as backdrop to a very personal mission. Olivia sat in the leather chair across from his desk, watching Robert pace as he spoke rapidly into his phone. She'd never seen him in his natural environment before, the commanding CEO in his element, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the casual clothes he'd worn to their lunch date. There was something almost predatory about his efficiency, a reminder that beneath his recent vulnerability was a man who'd built an empire through shrewd calculation. I don't care how many favors you have to call in, Robert was saying, his voice controlled but forceful. I want every document related to the Lawrence Hotel's acquisition. Every email, every memo, every coffee-stained napkin that might have William's signature on it. We're going to take that bastard apart piece by piece. Olivia still couldn't quite believe she was here in Robert's world fighting back instead of hiding. After their conversation at the hospital, she'd expected to feel more conflicted about accepting his help. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years' hope. Robert ended his call and turned to her, his expression softening. My investigative team found something interesting in William's financial records. It seems he's been living far beyond what his legitimate income should support. What does that mean? It means he's been siphoning money from somewhere, and I have a strong suspicion that somewhere is the accounts he was supposed to be managing for your family's company. Robert's smile was sharp as a blade. We're going to prove he committed fraud, Olivia, and when we do, we're going to get back every penny he stole. Olivia felt a surge of something that might have been vindication. For 3 years, she'd convinced herself that she was better off disappearing, that fighting back was futile against someone with William's connections and resources. But sitting in Robert's office, surrounded by his considerable power and influence, she began to believe justice might actually be possible. Can we really do that? We can, and we will. Robert sat on the edge of his desk, looking down at her intently. But I need you to be prepared for what this means. Once we file these charges, your story is going to become public. The media attention will be intense. Your identity as Olivia Lawrence will come out. Olivia took a deep breath, considering this. The past 3 years had been about hiding, about becoming invisible. The thought of stepping back into the spotlight was terrifying. What about my mother? We'll tell her together before any of this goes public, Robert said gently. She deserves to know the truth, Olivia, and she deserves to know how extraordinary her daughter really is. She's going to be so disappointed in me. The fear in her voice was palpable. I abandoned her when she needed me most. She's going to be proud of you, Robert corrected firmly. You survived losing everything, rebuilt your life from nothing, and took care of her without her even knowing it. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's heroic. Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes. How had she gotten so lucky to find someone who saw her so clearly, who could look at her worst decisions and see courage instead of cowardice? There's something else, Robert continued, his tone becoming more gentle. About us. About what happens after we expose William. Olivia's stomach clenched. Here it comes, she thought. The part where he realizes that being with her means being connected to scandal and drama. The part where he gracefully exits. I know this complicates things, she said quickly. If you want to step back until this is all resolved, I understand. This is going to be messy, and you have your reputation to think about. Olivia, Robert's voice cut through her rambling. Stop. She looked up at him, bracing herself for rejection. The only complication I'm worried about, Robert said, moving to kneel in front of her chair, is whether you're ready for everyone to know that Robert Morgan is completely, irrevocably in love with Olivia Lawrence. Olivia's breath caught. What did you just say? I love you, Robert repeated, taking her hands in his. I love your strength, your kindness, your intelligence. I love the way you make me want to be better than I am. I love that you see people for who they really are, not what they can do for you. I love that you make the best coffee in upstate New York, and that you can reduce pompous billionaires to apologetic schoolboys with a single look. Olivia laughed through her tears. She hadn't expected this, hadn't allowed herself to hope for it. Robert, I love that you're brave enough to start over when life knocks you down, and I love that you're trusting me enough to stop running and start fighting. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I love you, Olivia, and I don't care who knows it. Even when the media finds out that you're in love with a woman who was engaged to the man you're about to destroy in court. Especially then, Robert said with a grin that was both tender and fierce. Let them write whatever they want. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Olivia stared at him for a long moment. This man who'd somehow seen past every wall she'd built and decided she was worth fighting for. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. I love you too, she whispered. Robert's smile could have powered half of Manhattan. Yeah. Olivia leaned down to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. So, she said when they parted, what do we do now? Now, Robert said, standing and pulling her up with him, we create a battle plan. William Ashford has powerful allies, and he won't go down without a fight. Allies who would still stand with him if they knew what he's done. Robert's expression darkened. Charles Bennett, for one. I noticed something odd during the storm. He was the only one who seemed to already know William when we mentioned his name later. And my investigators have found connections between his accounts and William's offshore holdings. Charles Bennett, Olivia repeated, stunned. The tech CEO who was at the diner that night. The very same. I suspect they've been working together for years. Robert returned to his desk and pulled up several files on his computer. Look at this pattern. Each time William targeted a company, Bennett's tech firm would swoop in to modernize their systems. Perfect cover for accessing financial records, redirecting funds. So it wasn't just our company. They've been doing this to others. Exactly, which makes this bigger than just your family, Olivia. This is systematic fraud on a massive scale, but to prove it, we need your father's records. The next morning found them at Albany Medical Center. Olivia had barely slept, her mind racing with what she would say to her mother. How do you explain 3 years of deception? How do you ask forgiveness for abandoning your family in its darkest hour? You don't have to do this alone, Robert reminded her, squeezing her hand as they walked down the hospital corridor. I'll be right there with you. Margaret Lawrence's private room was filled with flowers, mostly from Olivia, sent anonymously over the years. At 65, Margaret still possessed the elegant beauty that had once graced society pages, though illness had thinned her frame and added lines to her face. When she saw Olivia, her eyes lit up with the simple pleasure of seeing her favorite waitress. Olivia, dear, what a lovely surprise. Then her gaze shifted to Robert, and confusion crossed her features. I don't believe we've met. Mom, Olivia said, her voice trembling slightly. This is Robert Morgan, and there's something I need to tell you. Margaret listened in stunned silence as Olivia revealed everything, her true identity, the reasons she'd disappeared, how she'd been anonymously supporting her mother's care while living as Olivia Hayes. Throughout the confession, Robert remained by her side, his steady presence a comfort as she laid bare 3 years of secrets and guilt. When Olivia finally fell silent, the room was so quiet she could hear the clock ticking on the wall. She couldn't bring herself to look at her mother, afraid of the disappointment or anger she might see. All this time, Margaret said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, all this time you were alive, taking care of me, and I never knew. I'm so sorry, Mom. Tears flowed freely down Olivia's cheeks now. I was a coward. I couldn't face what had happened, couldn't face you after I brought William into our lives. Oh, my darling girl. Margaret opened her arms and Olivia fell into them, sobbing like the child she'd once been. You have nothing to apologize for. But I left you alone. You survived, Margaret said firmly, holding her daughter's face between her hands. That's all any mother wants for her child. And not only did you survive, but you found a way to take care of me too. She looked over at Robert, her shrewd eyes assessing. And now you've found someone to help you fight back. Robert shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Mrs. Lawrence, there's something else you should know. I was involved in the takeover of your family's company. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You worked with William. I backed the deal, Robert had admitted. I had no idea about the fraud, but that's no excuse. I should have done my due diligence. And I want you to know that I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then surprised them both with a nod. You know, Richard always said you could measure a man not by his mistakes, but by what he does to correct them. She reached for Olivia's hand, then for Robert's. So, tell me how we're going to bring William Ashford to justice. We have evidence that William committed fraud, Robert said, relieved by her acceptance. But we need more. Is there anything your husband might have left behind? Records, documents, anything that might help our case? Margaret nodded, a fierce light entering her eyes. Richard suspected something wasn't right before he died. He kept saying William was too eager to integrate our financial systems. She reached for Olivia's hand. There may be proof in your father's study. He kept a hidden safe behind the painting of Venice. William has the house now, Olivia said. Yes, but I doubt he knows about the safe. Your father was old-fashioned that way, believed in keeping some secrets on paper rather than computers. Robert and Olivia exchanged glances. If there was physical evidence of William's fraud in that safe, It could be the key to their case. We need to get into that house, Robert said. There's a spare key in the boathouse, Margaret offered. The staff always kept one hidden there for emergencies. If William hasn't changed too much, it might still work. As they were leaving, Margaret called Olivia back. Darling, I need you to know something. I never believed you were gone. A mother knows these things. I kept hoping one day you'd come back to me, and now here you are. Her eyes shifted to Robert. Take care of my daughter, Mr. Morgan. I plan to Mrs. Lawrence, for as long as she'll let me. That night, Robert and Olivia drove to the Lawrence family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Once a showplace featured in architectural magazines, the property still maintained its grandeur. Though Olivia noticed subtle changes, gardens less meticulously maintained windows that could use washing. William was never one for proper maintenance, she murmured as they parked some distance from the main house. Always more interested in appearances than substance. Finding the spare key in the boathouse was easier than expected. William had apparently never thought to change the hiding place, a loose brick near the old toolbox. Getting into the house itself proved more challenging. There's probably a security system, Robert whispered as they approached the service entrance. Any idea what the code might be? Knowing William his birthday, he always was narcissistic that way. Sure enough, the code panel accepted the 6-digit date, and they were in. The house was dark with only security lights illuminating the hallways. Olivia moved through the familiar space like a ghost, memories flooding back with each step. Holiday gatherings, family dinners, the night William had proposed right before everything fell apart. This way, she whispered, leading Robert to her father's study. The room was largely unchanged. Leather-bound books still lined the walls. The massive mahogany desk still dominated the space. Only the photos had been removed, the personal touches that had made it Richard Lawrence's sanctuary. Olivia went straight to the painting of Venice, a Canaletto reproduction her father had adored. Behind it, just as her mother had said, was a small wall safe. Do you know the combination? Robert asked. I think so. Olivia's fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the numbers: her birthday, her mother's birthday, the year Lawrence Hotels was founded. The safe swung open with a soft click. Inside was a manila folder labeled simply, Contingency. Olivia opened it, her breath catching as she scanned the contents. Financial records, copies of transactions, emails printed and annotated in her father's careful hand, all showing a pattern of embezzlement and fraud with William Ashford's name prominently featured. Robert, she breathed. This is it. Dad knew. He knew William was stealing from the company. Robert looked through the documents, his expression growing grimmer with each page. This goes beyond embezzlement, Olivia. William was deliberately tanking your company's stock, making it vulnerable to takeover. And look at this. He pointed to a series of transactions. He was funneling money through shell companies, some of which connect back to Charles Bennett. So they were working together all along, Olivia said, the pieces finally falling into place. William sabotaged the company from inside while Bennett engineered the technical aspects of the fraud. This is exactly what we needed. These documents prove a conspiracy. Robert carefully photographed each document with his phone. We need to get these to my legal team right away. As he finished taking the last photo, a new sound came from elsewhere in the house. The front door opened, followed by voices, William's distinctive cadence, and another that made Robert freeze. Charles Bennett, he whispered. They're here, together. We need to go, Olivia whispered back, her heart pounding. Now. They replaced the documents, closed the safe, and rehung the painting with practiced efficiency. Just as they were about to slip out through the study's French doors, they heard footsteps approaching. William's showing me the new security system next week. Bennett's voice came through the door. Should make these little ventures of ours much smoother. It's amazing what people will sign off on when you throw technical jargon at them, William replied with a chuckle. The new transfers won't even register on the regular audit systems. Robert and Olivia exchanged glances. This was direct evidence of an ongoing conspiracy, but they had no recording device. The door handle turned. No time to escape. Robert pulled Olivia behind the heavy curtains just as William and Charles entered the study. Drink, William offered, moving toward a liquor cabinet near the window where they were hiding. Olivia held her breath, feeling Robert's arm tighten protectively around her. Not tonight. We need clear heads for this, Bennett replied. The Morgan situation concerns me. Morgan, what about him? William's voice held a note of irritation. He's asking questions. My sources tell me he's looking into our previous acquisitions. All of them. Let him look. There's nothing to find. Except there is, William. Bennett's voice hardened. Your father-in-law kept records. Did you ever find them? William scoffed. Richard was old school. Paper records, if they exist, are nothing but kindling now. Don't underestimate Morgan. He's built his reputation on finding weaknesses others miss. And now he's involved with your ex. Olivia, William laughed, but it sounded forced. She's nothing. A waitress playing house with a billionaire. He'll tire of her soon enough. She's a Lawrence, William. Don't forget that. If she convinces Morgan to dig deeper, then we neutralize them both. William's tone sent a chill down Olivia's spine. I have enough dirt on Morgan's early deals to keep him occupied. And as for Olivia, let's just say her mother's health care could suddenly become very complicated. Robert felt Olivia stiffen beside him. His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently. Don't make threats you can't back up, Bennett warned. That's how people make mistakes. We need to be smarter than that. The conversation continued as the men moved to the desk, discussing technical aspects of their next scheme. For 15 agonizing minutes, Robert and Olivia remained motionless behind the curtain, listening as William and Bennett incriminated themselves further with each word. Finally, the men left, heading to another part of the house. Robert and Olivia waited several more minutes before daring to move. We need to get out of here, Robert whispered. Now. They slipped out through the French doors into the garden. The night was clear and cold, the moon casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. They were halfway to the perimeter when floodlights suddenly blazed to life, bathing the grounds in harsh white light. Perimeter breach detected, an automated voice announced from hidden speakers. Security system engaged. Run! Robert grabbed Olivia's hand as they sprinted toward the property line. Behind them, they heard a door slam open and William's voice shouting commands. The sound of footsteps pounded on the gravel path. They reached the hedge line just as a security guard rounded the corner, flashlight in hand. Robert pulled Olivia down into the shadows as the beam swept past them. I don't see anyone, the guard called back to the house. Keep looking. William's voice was tight with rage. Someone was here. Yet for 30 heart-stopping minutes, they remained hidden as the search continued around them. Finally, the guard moved to another section of the property, giving them their chance. Now, Robert whispered, and they made their dash to the car, keeping low and using the landscaping for cover. They made it to the vehicle without being spotted. Robert started the engine and drove away with lights off until they were a safe distance from the estate, heart still pounding from the narrow escape. They threatened my mother, Olivia said when she could finally speak. William actually threatened my mother. We have what we need, Robert assured her, reaching for her hand, and now we've heard them planning new crimes. That gives us grounds for immediate action. What kind of action? The kind that involves the FBI. Robert's voice was grim with determination. This isn't just a civil case anymore, Olivia. This is criminal, conspiracy, fraud, and now threats. By morning, William Ashford and Charles Bennett won't know what hit them. The next morning, Robert's legal team worked overtime processing the evidence they'd gathered. The documents from Richard Lawrence's safe provided the foundation, but Robert's investigators had been busy too uncovering a pattern of financial manipulation that stretched back years. William's been embezzling from not just Lawrence hotels, but every company he's been involved with. Robert explained to Olivia as they reviewed the findings. He's been hiding money in offshore accounts, manipulating stock prices, and using inside information to benefit himself and Bennett. They've built an entire system around it. How did no one catch this before? Because they were careful and because they had powerful friends protecting them. Robert's expression was grim. But not anymore. We've got enough to take to the SEC and the FBI. This isn't just a civil case anymore, Olivia. William and Bennett are looking at serious criminal charges. Before they could make their next move, Robert's phone rang. The name on the display made him frown. It's my board chairman, he said, answering the call. Olivia watched as Robert's expression darkened during the conversation. When he hung up, his jaw was tight with anger. What is it? Williams made his first counter move. He's contacted my board claiming I'm pursuing a personal vendetta that endangers the company. He's also leaked rumors to the financial press that I'm distracted by a scandalous relationship with you. He's trying to undermine you professionally. It won't work, Robert said firmly. My board knows me better than that, but it shows he's desperate, which makes him dangerous. What about my mother, if William was serious about his threats? I've already arranged for private security at the hospital, Robert assured her. No one gets near her without proper clearance. And I've got my best people monitoring William's movements. The legal wheels turned quickly after that. Federal agents raided Williams' offices and Charles Bennett's tech firm, simultaneously seizing computers and documents. Bennett, faced with overwhelming evidence, cracked first. Within days, he was cooperating with authorities, turning on William to save himself. The final confrontation that Olivia had dreaded and anticipated for 3 years took place in the conference room of Robert's law firm. Unlike the clandestine meeting at the Lawrence estate, this one was deliberately formal, surrounded by enough legal firepower to level a small city with federal agents waiting discreetly in an adjacent room. William arrived with his own team of attorneys, confident and smug as ever, clearly expecting this to be a routine intimidation session. His confidence faltered the moment he saw Olivia sitting at the table beside Robert, no longer the broken woman he'd encountered at the hospital. This Olivia was poised, determined, and backed by resources that matched his own. "Olivia," he said, his tone falsely warm, "I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd learn to avoid situations above your current station." "Careful, William," Robert said quietly. "Everything said in this room is being recorded." William's smile tightened. "I'm simply concerned about an old friend. Olivia, surely you don't believe whatever story Robert has been telling you about our business arrangement. Your father's company failed because he made poor decisions, not because of any impropriety on my part." "Is that what you call embezzling $2.7 million from the employee pension fund?" Olivia asked calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. William's face went white and his lawyers began frantically whispering among themselves. "I have no idea what you're talking about," William said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Robert slid a thick folder across the table. "Bank records, email correspondence, forged documents. We have everything, William. Every illegal transfer, every falsified report, every lie you told to cover your tracks. And every threat you made," Olivia added, her gaze unwavering, "including those against my mother." William opened the folder with shaking hands, his face growing paler with each page. This is fabricated. You can't prove any of this." "We can, and we have," one of Robert's attorneys said smoothly. "Mr. Bennett has already provided a full statement to federal authorities. He's been quite forthcoming about your joint ventures." "Charles," William's composure finally cracked. "That backstabbing, the FBI agents in the next room would like a word," Robert interrupted, nodding toward the door where 2 men in dark suits had appeared. "You have 2 choices, William. You can cooperate now, return the stolen funds, and hope for leniency, or you can continue lying and face the full consequences of what you've done." "You destroyed my family," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "You destroyed people's retirement funds, their life savings. For what? To fund your lifestyle, to buy more expensive toys." William's mask finally slipped, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. "You have no idea what it was like being engaged to the Princess of Lawrence Hotels while having to scrape by on my salary. Everyone expected me to be wealthy to be worthy of you. I needed that money." "You needed it?" Olivia's laugh was bitter. "William, I never cared about money. I cared about honesty, loyalty, love, things you apparently never understood." "You say that now, but you were different then. You lived in a world where money was just there. You never had to worry about it." "And now I do," Olivia replied. "I've been working as a waitress for 3 years, William. I've lived paycheck to paycheck, worried about bills, made decisions based on what I could afford instead of what I wanted. And you know what, I'm happier now than I ever was with you." William's gaze shifted to Robert, his expression becoming vicious. "And you think he's different? You think Robert Morgan gives a damn about anything other than profit? He's using you, Olivia. Once the novelty wears off, once he gets bored of playing savior, he'll discard you just like you did." Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. "The difference, William, is that I actually love her. Not her money, not her connections, not what she can do for my image. Her. You barely know her." "I know enough," Robert replied. "I know she's brave and kind and strong enough to rebuild her life from nothing. I know she's loyal enough to take care of her mother without expecting gratitude or recognition. I know she's forgiving enough to serve coffee to strangers in a storm, even strangers who might have hurt her family. William looked between them, seeing something in their expressions that made his shoulders slump in defeat. If I cooperate, he asked quietly, what happens to me? That's not up to us, Olivia said. That's up to the justice system. She paused, then added softly, but William, for what it's worth, I hope you find a way to become the man I once thought you were. Even in her moment of triumph, Olivia couldn't help but show compassion. It was, Robert thought, one of the many reasons he loved her. 3 hours later, Olivia and Robert sat in the back of his car as they drove toward Albany. William had been taken into custody, the funds were being traced, and Olivia's family name was being cleared. It should have felt like vindication, but Olivia mostly felt tired. How are you doing? Robert asked gently, taking her hand. I keep thinking about the person I was 3 years ago, Olivia replied. So naive, so trusting. I would have never imagined that someone I loved could betray me so completely. Do you regret it, being trusting? Olivia considered this. No, I regret being stupid about William, but I don't regret being the kind of person who believes in people. That's what led me to trust you, after all. Robert took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Speaking of trusting me, there's something I want to ask you. What? Robert reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Olivia's heart stopped. I know this is fast, he said quickly. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, and I know we're in the middle of legal proceedings and media attention and general chaos, but Olivia, I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to spend another day without being sure that you're mine and I'm yours. He opened the box, revealing a stunning solitaire diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows across the car's interior. I love you, Robert continued. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me? Olivia stared at the ring, then at Robert's hopeful, nervous face. A few weeks ago, she'd been convinced that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now looking at this man who'd fought for her, believed in her, seen her at her worst, and somehow loved her anyway. Are you sure? She asked. Really sure, because once you marry me, you're stuck with all of this. The media attention, the complicated family history, the fact that your future wife used to be a waitress. Olivia, Robert said with a laugh, I fell in love with the waitress. Everything else is just bonus. Olivia looked at the ring again, this symbol of promise and forever, and felt something settle into place in her chest. Hope, yes, but also certainty. Yes, she said, smiling through happy tears. Yes, I'll marry you. As Robert slipped the ring onto her finger, Olivia thought about Frank's words from that day in the diner. Sometimes the world surprises you. Sometimes the best love stories are the ones you never see coming. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the storm that seems like it's going to destroy your life turns out to be the thing that saves it. 6 months later, Olivia stood in the bridal suite of the Lawrence estate, the family property that had been restored to her as part of the legal settlement, adjusting her grandmother's pearls for the third time. Through the window, she could see guests gathering on the lawn where she and Robert would be married in less than an hour. You're glowing, her mother said from behind her. Olivia turned to see Margaret Lawrence standing in the doorway, looking healthier and happier than she had in years. The stress of her medical bills was gone, her treatments were going well, and discovering that her daughter was not only alive, but thriving had given her a new lease on life. I'm nervous, Olivia admitted. Good nervous or bad nervous? Good nervous, definitely good nervous. Olivia smoothed her hands over the silk of her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design that made her feel like herself, not like she was playing a part. Mom, are you sure you're okay with all this? The media attention, the publicity. Margaret laughed, moving to help Olivia with her veil. Darling, I'm proud of you. Proud of how you survived, how you rebuilt your life, how you found love again after everything that happened. And I'm especially proud that you found a man who was willing to make amends for his part in what happened. You've really forgiven Robert for backing William's takeover. Forgiveness comes easier when you see someone working so hard to right their wrongs, Margaret said wisely. Robert could have walked away when he discovered who you really were. Instead, he chose to stand with you, to fight for justice, to help rebuild what was lost. That shows character. A knock at the door interrupted them. Come in, Olivia called. Frank entered, looking distinguished in his rented tuxedo. Robert had insisted that Frank walk Olivia down the aisle, and Olivia couldn't imagine anyone else in that role. Ready, kiddo? Frank asked, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Ready, Olivia confirmed, taking his offered arm. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of perfect moments. Olivia's college friends had flown in from around the world, mixing with Robert's business associates and creating an unlikely but harmonious gathering. The press was kept at a respectful distance, and for once Olivia didn't mind the attention. Let the world see how happy she was. Robert stood at the altar looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, but it was his expression when he saw her walking toward him that made Olivia's heart race. Wonder love and something that looked like amazement, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached him. "You're not bad yourself," Olivia replied, making him laugh. As they exchanged vows and rings promising to love each other through whatever life brought, Olivia felt the last pieces of her broken past finally healing. The woman she'd been before, privileged, naive, sheltered, and the woman she'd become, resilient, practical, compassionate, merged into someone stronger than either. And Robert, looking into her eyes as he promised to love her forever, knew that the storm that had stranded him at Riverside Diner had been the most fortunate accident of his life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared. "You may kiss the bride." As their lips met, sealing their promises to each other, the gathered crowd erupted in applause. Frank wiped away a tear. Margaret beamed with pride, and somewhere Olivia was certain her father was smiling too. The reception that followed was a celebration not just of their marriage, but of second chances and unexpected blessings. The Lawrence estate, once taken from them through fraud, now welcomed friends and family to celebrate love's triumph over betrayal. When it was time for toasts, Frank stood, his voice steady despite his emotion. "I've been watching these two since the night they met when a snowstorm brought 15 billionaires to my little diner. I knew then what I know now, that sometimes the things that look like disasters turn out to be the best things that could happen to us. To Robert and Olivia, may your life together be as rich in love as you are in all other things." Glasses raised, and as Robert looked at his bride, he knew that all the wealth and power he'd accumulated over his life paled in comparison to the treasure he'd found in a small-town diner during the worst storm in 20 years. Later that evening, Robert surprised Olivia by leading her to a quiet corner of the garden where a table had been set up with documents waiting for her signature. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Our first venture together," Robert explained, pulling out a chair for her. "The Lawrence Morgan Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to two causes: supporting employees affected by corporate fraud and funding small businesses in rural communities." Olivia leafed through the papers, her eyes widening as she saw the initial endowment figure. "Robert, this is a start," he finished for her. "And there's something else." He handed her another folder. "The deed to Riverside Diner transferred to Frank's name, along with expansion capital if he wants it." "Frank expand," Olivia laughed, looking across the reception to where the old man was charming a group of Robert's bankers. "He's been talking about retiring." "Maybe, but we've been talking too. He has ideas for a chain of diners across upstate New York. Quality food fare, wages, community spaces. He just needed the resources." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "You did this for him, for you, for us." Robert took her hands. "You showed me that business can be about more than just profit. That success should be measured by the lives we touch, not just the accounts we build." As the celebration continued around them, Olivia realized that their story was just beginning. Together, they would create something that honored both their pasts while building something entirely new, a legacy of redemption, compassion, and love. 1 year later, Olivia stood in the newly renovated main branch of Riverside Diners, watching as Frank cut the ribbon on what had become the flagship of a growing enterprise. 5 locations had opened across the state, each maintaining the warmth and character of the original, while providing employment opportunities and community gathering spaces in small towns, much like the one where their story began. Margaret Lawrence, now cancer-free, stood beside them, having become an active board member of the Lawrence Morgan Foundation, particularly focused on healthcare access initiatives for rural communities. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered to Olivia. "Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become." Robert joined them, slipping an arm around his wife's waist. "Speaking of building," he said, "the contractor called. The nursery renovations will be done next week." Olivia leaned into him, her hand resting protectively over the small bump just beginning to show beneath her dress. "Just in time." As Frank welcomed the crowd into the new diner, Olivia looked around at the world they'd created together. A world where second chances were possible, where storms could bring unexpected blessings, and where coffee served with kindness could change lives forever. "What are you thinking?" Robert asked, seeing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest woman alive," Olivia replied, reaching up to kiss him, "and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "Not a chance," Robert said, holding her close. "Some decisions you just know are right, even when they come out of nowhere. Like a snowstorm that strands strangers together. Like a waitress who sees a billionaire as just a man. Like a love story that begins with coffee and ends with forever." And as the winter snow began to fall softly outside, they knew that no storm could ever threaten what they'd built together, a foundation of love stronger than any force nature or man could muster.